Hi, I'm Gerard Virga, and I'm the host of the Florida Family Law Attorney Podcast. Today is going to be episode 2 of season 1, and we are so honored to have this guest with us. It's been somebody I wanted to talk to for a while. Her name is Megan Sanders. She's a mental health professional here in Bay County, Florida. She has over 10 years of experience in that field, and she brings a depth of knowledge unique in our community, dealing with children in transition, children in trauma, and children in foster care, and how to help children through that. So Megan, welcome to our podcast. How are you doing today?
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, Megan, I tried to give you a little intro, but you have such a extensive resume and extensive experience in this field. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you into this field?
Sure. Yeah. So it's kind of a little all over the map. I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio. I actually went to undergrad for music and went for music therapy. And at that time, I really wanted to work in corrections. That was, for some reason, my heart was really drawn to that. And at that time, I won't say how long ago, but quite some time ago, there were only 2 music therapy programs in the country that worked with folks that were in corrections. And one was here in Florida, and that was Florida State Hospital in Chattahoochee. And I was like, that's it. That's where I'm going. Fell absolutely in love with Florida State Hospital, which no one ever says, and spent the next 10 years of my career there. Got my master's in counseling and went from being, an unpaid intern to supervising all the treatment services there and really learning a lot about the ins and outs about how failures within our systems can result in lifelong consequences and long-term consequences for individuals who were typically in the system since early childhood. Stayed there, like I said, about 10 years, and then got an opportunity to work for law enforcement. So kind of flipped over to the other side and was a wellness coordinator for the agricultural law enforcement agency in Tallahassee. Got to do a lot more of the social work kind of thing where I got to coordinate services, go out in critical incident response, help with first responders processing traumatic stress and understanding how that impacts their abilities to perform, but also their day-to-day life. And then was also working in community mental health at that time, working with the kids that I would see the adult versions at Florida State Hospital. So kids that were sheltered, and either work with them through reunification or through the adoption process at Camelot Community Care, which is just an outstanding community agency that I cannot speak highly enough about, and really got to see how the impacts of those early childhood adverse experiences, how we could work to rectify those in the moment and how those could really change the trajectory of a child's life. Was there for several years and then foolishly fell in love and had to move to Panama City. And now I work at the therapy room, and I'm the director of children and adolescent services here. So we do private practice, but we also do a lot of pro bono services. And I specialize with the little ones all the way. I see adults as well, but the little itty bitties are usually my go-tos, and working with kids who've experienced any kind of abuse or trauma in childhood is kind of where my heart relies. So that's kind of
so cool. That is so
long-term.
cool. It reminds me, it's interesting because a lot of people don't know this, but I started out my very first year after I left the University of Florida as a school teacher, and I was teaching history and civics and economics, and I got a job at a place, I don't think it's there anymore, but Panama City Marine Institute downtown. And so I was working with a lot of kids who had came out of correctional programs. And so after about a year of, working with these children and really figuring out really what the heart of some of their issues were, I was really drawn to the law, because some of them I didn't feel maybe got a fair shake in court. Some of them you could see that there were really underlying family law issues that left them in this position or led them down this trajectory, like you said, and they were down in PCMI. And while, I wanted to help them, I thought, hey, this would be a great way to really help the root cause rather than just dealing with the problem that was before me, and the things that they had already experienced. So that's kind of what drove me into law, and then ultimately, family law. So, I think that's kind of interesting that, you had some of the same experiences that drew you into this. So one of the things that really struck me about your CV and everything in your credentials is, that you specialize in working with young children, using like these creative techniques and this music therapy. And can you explain to us, us outsiders, what that all involves and how it helps the kids and how you got involved in these techniques?
Yeah, for sure. I always like to call it the spoonful of sugar technique. When you think about a kid in general, they're usually not coming to therapy by choice, especially as someone who was a mandated therapist for a lot of years. No one was in therapy with me by choice for the bulk of my career. So it was a really great opportunity to figure out, okay, well, how do we make this at least an enjoyable use of your time? Music's pretty universal. Most people enjoy music, whether it's creating it, listening to it, and it's a easy icebreaker of, okay, well, who are you listening to now? What do you like? Do you like to make music? Do you like to sing? Especially with the little ones, if we can use the time and the space to create things and make it enjoyable instead of let's sit and stare at each other and maybe do a worksheet and talk about our feelings, maybe we can enjoy the space, but then we end up doing that work anyway. And it's been a really great opportunity to help educate others, I think, as well, and families, parents, caregivers. There's more than just one way to discuss these concerns and these issues, and kids are constantly communicating with you, whether or not we are picking up on the type of communication they're sharing. Behaviors are always an attempt to get a need met. And if they don't have the skills yet to communicate their feelings, then let's be honest, how many adults are really well versed in expressing their feelings? Like it's a complicated thing for anybody to do. So, like, let's give them the tools. Let's play around with it. Let's explore. Do they know what these feelings are? Probably not. So let's help them identify, okay, this song represents, the way I feel when I'm mad. Ooh, this buzzing sound or this really loud, fast-paced music, that's what my body feels like when I'm upset. Or this really slow string music is what I feel like when I'm sad. And so we can get great representations so that they can communicate what's going on in their mind and their body. And then parents can understand and go, okay, this is where we're coming from. And this is the way that we can share what we're going through. So I can understand where you're coming from. So it's a nice medium for expression on both sides.
That seems so, so interesting and so cool. And as you were sitting here talking about it, I was thinking about what I listen to at different phases of the day or different things I'm doing, and certain songs I, will pull out of the library and play over and over, like it might be Eye of the Tiger because you're going to trial or you're in that mood. And I never thought that I'm communicating to the world by replaying the song. I'm sending out a signal to what mood I'm in or what I'm experiencing, or if I'm sad. And that's something I've never even thought of. That's really, your music selection is a form of communication. And, I think that's really neat. And then I know on our end, we have a lot of children who end up going to therapists through the family law process. We have a lot of children who are ordered to go to social investigations as part of the social investigation process in these custody cases when the court's trying to get the best information for what's in that child's best interest. And one of the things that I always think about, so you have kids that are of an age and maturity, they know what's going on. They realize mom and dad are going their separate ways. They realize that their future is not going to look the same anymore. And now they're going into this professional's office, and I would think as a kid, you might feel scrutinized. You might feel this is another thing in my life now that I'm different than everybody else, or I'm having to go through this and I didn't ask for any of this to happen to me. So having, tools like that in your repertoire to break the ice, to make them feel like happy and that this is normal and this person is a person and, and is warm, rather than just getting drilled with questions or being in a cold environment. It makes me feel better that you guys are trained in those type of soothing activities and methodologies to take the edge off this for these children, because it is, imagine this, it's really hard. And then, they may be asking you questions about things that you've observed in the marriage as a kid that, you're validating, or that the therapist is trying to get information that if you're really in harm's way, and, I couldn't imagine being stuck between both parents in this situation. And now we have a professional asking me questions about probably the most painful thing that they've experienced, so that's really great that you have that. And it honestly makes me happy and hear that, to know that there are people out there who have those tools that can mitigate this for children who are facing these issues.
Yeah.
Now, a large part of your career, it looks like you worked extensively with children in foster care. And I wanted to ask you, what lessons have you learned that might apply to children experiencing family transitions through a divorce or a custody case based on your experience with the children who are in foster care?
Yeah, I think what always comes back to the center for me is that being a kid is extremely hard. And I think we forget that a lot. I know you see this in your work all the time. They have no control really over anything. And so one thing that was always very sobering to me working with kids in foster care was that, they would be sheltered from their environment. No matter how unsafe it was, that was their home. And then put into a stranger's home who, as well-meaning as they possibly may be, they're strangers. And then, hey, let's get you ready to go to school the next day because we're trying to do continuity and keep you in the mix of things. The expectations of kids to continue on with life and to continue doing the things they're supposed to do through this tornado that's happening around them is really unfair and really difficult. So I think it's really important for everyone just to take a moment and a step back to realize that these are tiny little bodies filled with huge emotions that have not had that much time on this earth yet to figure out what any of this means. They don't really have a say in it. Sometimes they're caught in between. There's loyalty conflicts. Sometimes they're expected to be on the side of one parent versus the other, intentionally or not. They're being put into different environments without expectation. Maybe they have friends to talk to. Maybe they don't. It's a whole lot of pressure and change on an individual. And then we're expecting them to maintain their grades and to just kind of go along with it and be okay. A lot of parents that I have worked with, again, with the best intentions, I rarely work with parents who are like, hey, my kid's a problem, fix them. But it's, hey, their grades are dropping. I need that to be addressed. Well, their grades are dropping because they're devastated because their life has blown up. Let's get to, like you said, let's get to the root of what's going on. It's kind of crazy to expect their grades to be fine through all of this. And I think helping to shift the expectations and challenge the idea that a behavior is the problem versus how do we make sure this child feels connected and cared for and sustained through these experiences. And then that's difficult for caregivers and parents to do through this as well, because they're going through their own trauma. And it's very difficult to see, outside of the picture frame when you're still in the picture. So everyone's stressed, everyone's to the extreme. Sometimes, obviously I'm biased, but I think therapy is helpful for everyone. But sometimes for these kids, just having a safe space they can go where they don't have to act a certain way. They don't have to fulfill expectations. They can be mad at whoever they want to be. And it's a safe place where they can just let that out, talk about it, and don't have to worry about consequences of, I'm mad at mom right now, or I'm mad at dad, or I'm sick of staying at grandma's house. And they can know it's just a place they can barf all that information out without it getting back to a parent. And then they can go on with their day. They don't really have a lot of outlets for that either. Anyone that they can talk to is within that family system. So just a lot of grace for kids. They're really trapped in family situations like that. They don't have a lot of space for themselves.
Well, one of the things we talk about here a lot is resilience, and telling our clients, let's get you to a place. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to have these emotions. We don't expect you to not have them. That's that comes with the trade in family law. If you want a sterile law practice, family law is not for you.
Yeah.
If you want hands-on and dealing with emotions and dealing with people and being there, the shoulder to cry on and handing them the Kleenex, and not only that, but also celebrating the victories with them, then family law is good. If you're not that type of person, then I would say probably family law wouldn't suit you. But with that, being said, there's just this notion that kids are resilient. Kids are resilient. They'll get used to it. Kids are resilient. And as somebody who's done this for a while, who's really contemplated these things, they are resilient, just like everybody else is resilient. But, is labeling that, kids are resilient, that mindset, is it really just a cop-out not to have to deal with, the fact that we have small, young people who perhaps don't have a vocabulary or the means to express what's going on, who are, didn't choose for any of this to happen. I think most kids would probably tell you they would rather their parents had made it work or it had worked out, at least when they're little. Maybe when they're older, they may think that's a better choice. But, I think that about that often, and that it is sometimes glossed over in the law and kind of glossed over in family law that they're people and they're not just going to bounce back and roll out of bed the next day like nothing happened when something traumatic has happened and it's traumatic for them. And then what I see a whole lot of is parents who use like the end results of the trauma, like the bad grades. It's not the underlying root problem that we're getting a divorce and things are changing, but this parent's not doing the homework. And then they try to use that as evidence of that, One of the things I've been moving toward a little bit and trying to present these cases is educating the courts. And I mean, no disrespect to the judge or to the court system, but I tell people all the time, I'm a lawyer. You know how many classes in psychology I took, in community college before I went to the University of Florida? I don't have a degree in developmental psychology. I don't have there was no book in law school about how to be a super parent. And, judges have that same background, that same education. And this is going to segue kind of into our next topic. But, about a year ago, I was invited to talk through the Florida Bar Family Law section on trauma-informed courts.
Cool.
And, I learned a great deal about ACEs and, some of the testing and science and how trauma affects the physical and mental well-being and how that can manifest even in the physical symptoms or diseases or problems later in life for people. And bringing that knowledge to the judge, even if the therapist or mental health professionals never talk to the child, but just as tell us about how this affects the child. Tell us about these terms, how being exposed to something like this could affect a person. Just getting that general information, if you can get that into evidence, that's something I've been really striving for and thinking about more in my practice, because it is something that, for a long time, kids are resilient. And that was kind of the mindset. And I think more and more as science and mental health and physiology have, kind of dovetailed together, they're not just resilient. They don't just bounce back. And some of the long-term consequences, whether it be able to properly form relationships in the future, or how you deal with, fight or flight kind of wiring of the brain. And are you going to have a person who's more geared toward hostilities and feeling this anxiety and being more aggressive? Or are you going to have a person who feels like basic needs are generally going to get met, so I don't have to be aggressive and anxious, and I can focus on like higher level thought? That's, the ramifications, are new, I think, to family law. Really, I think they're just now, and that was the whole point of us having that, discussion about a year ago, and then getting the court system to catch up with science. And is a challenge. Lawyers are not, clinical psychologists. We're not in the know. And then, we get used very much that this is how it was done and this is what the case law says. But the case law, or how it was done 20, 30 years ago, it may not be reflective of the science today of really what's in the child's best interest. Yeah. So, I saw that, you were a trauma-informed care facility trainer. Yes. I thought that was pretty cool, as we because I was thinking about these things and been thinking about them. Tell us a little bit about that, and what is a trauma-informed approach, to therapy?
Sure. Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for taking the education route that you have with the court system. I have been a guardian ad litem volunteer for going on a decade for that now as well. And like you said, there's an educational gap. You've got caseworkers and dependency case managers and mental health professionals, and then you've got lawyers, and they're all trying to work collaboratively in these processes. But there's a gap of information going from either direction. So thank you so much for taking such a stance to educate folks who you don't know what you don't know. And that's where this trauma-informed approach has been such a big push the last 5 to 10 years, because with the knowledge and the education, we all think differently and we see these things differently. I think once you recognize, like you said, the science and the statistics behind what happens to a child's brain and the neural pruning that happens when they go through repeated traumatic experiences or they're in a chronic state of fight or flight, the neurons are pruned away from the ability to learn and grow, and the pathways are reinforced for survival.
That's so absolutely what we learned.
Yeah, they are robbed of the opportunity to become their own individual person, to be curious, to explore, to retain information. A lot of adults I see who had traumatic experiences in childhood have huge blocks of time that they don't remember from childhood. Their brain is primed to protect them, not to learn and grow. And so the more we can educate folks on why it is so important to create safe spaces, why arguing and fighting in front of children or using them in the middle, even again, rarely do I meet a parent who is doing it consciously and purposefully. It is a byproduct of going through something really painful when your family is getting dissolved. Knowledge is power in that regard of, hey, these are going to have lasting impacts on your children. And there are other ways that we can approach this, but also for the institutions to become informed. So I worked at a psychiatric facility and we still had to go through repeated training of, hey, what is trauma informed? Because when you have that many moving parts, it's very easy to dismiss things as conscious choices of poor behavior as opposed to, hey, this is a trauma, fight or flight response from someone. And we would see that often where if somebody is quote unquote acting out in a situation, well, they're trying to get attention. They're trying to do this. Okay, but why? Why would someone act that way? What could have happened to this person that they're not able to make meaningful connections with others, that this is the only reason or the only way that they know how to seek attention? That has been a reinforced behavior. So when we see that in kids, finding ways to help them find more healthier approaches, but also like making sure those core needs are met. If those needs aren't met, it doesn't matter how much higher order thinking we try and do. Your brain literally can't process it. As you know, your brain cannot think critically if you're trying to figure out if you're going to be able to eat that day, if you're safe physically or psychologically. You can't. You're not going to be able to retain your multiplication tables. You're not going to be able to do any of those things. So if we can't maintain those foundational layers, then everything else is kind of moot. So that kind of information for the court systems, for law. I recently was able to get an opportunity. I'm now the secretary for the parenting coordination subcommittee, and we're working on that of how do we work.
Is that for the family law section of the Florida Bar, or?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay.
And so
Okay.
I'm so excited because they've opened it up with more and more mental health support of, okay, how do we really instill this into what we're doing, and how do we inform and work collaboratively like you've been discussing? How do we do this best together? Everyone's intentions are good. So how do we inform each other? And the collaborative process with that has been very eye-opening for me as well, as someone who is not a lawyer, who has had very minimal exposure except for, getting frustrated with laws that don't fall in line with what I wanted as a provider,
Even lawyers share that feeling. There's lots of laws out there that we don't necessarily agree with, but we have to trust the judgment of the legislature. One of the things I was going to say was, it's a little off topic, but I think it melts. We talk about education in this country, and we talk about the budget for education and the end product and the results. And I started to think to myself as I was learning this last year, how many kids in our society, whether it be through divorce, custody, because we're seeing, just a lot of times paternity custody cases now, DCF, unfortunate, that happens, but sometimes there's kids that fall into the dependency umbrella, or, just other socioeconomic standards and factors in their life that are creating trauma, that no matter how good the educator is, or no matter how good the school system is, we're making it, I'm not saying it's impossible, but you're definitely making an uphill fight to get to that higher level learning and to make a smooth transition for these kids. And it is something that's just not taught in law school at all. At least, I'm getting a little bit old, but maybe it is now. But when I was there, it was not. And we talk about the best interest of the child, and they give us these, factors A through T, and they're good. They're a little generic, honestly, and they're not necessarily built on any real data. We're looking at how are we going to delegate parental responsibilities after the litigation, homeschool community record of the child. But we're not really looking at maybe some of the real psychological principles that might be in play as to what would be traumatic for this individual person. And now, we have this presumption of 50-50, which in some cases, or a lot of the cases, that might be excellent, because I'm a big believer that kids need both parents, okay? However, not every circumstance is geared toward 50-50, based on the circumstances. And while it says that the courts are supposed to still review all those factors, what we're seeing really in our practice a whole lot is it's not outright articulated this way, but it's almost placing the burden on us to prove some kind of almost a detriment, that 50-50 would pose a detriment, rather than, maybe the most objective analysis of the factors. And we see that a lot. And then, I tell people, unfortunately, with this, it's frustrating as a lawyer, because it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. And then you got to prove it within the rules. If someone's abused physically, there's a mark, there's a scratch, there's a police report, there's lots of potential tangible things that you can use as evidence. Proving trauma that is not a result of something physical, is very ethereal and it's hard to prove. And that's where I struggle as a lawyer at times. And that's why I've been, thinking about this more and more and how to bring this into evidence, this view of this trauma informed approach so that, maybe 50-50 doesn't fit. Maybe 50-50 would be traumatic in this circumstance because one of the parents hasn't been in the picture for a long time. And now all of a sudden they want to be involved and the presumption's 50-50. Or how do we formulate a parenting plan that will really create an appropriate transition time and acclimation period to bring a parent who may have been out the picture for a long time, whether it's their fault or not. Sometimes it's not their fault. And they're actually the parent that may have been wronged. They may have been denied the time sharing, but you still need to get them acclimated so the kid is not really the victim, And then when I talk with clients a lot, I try really hard to get them to realize that you may think with your behavior, you're doing tit for tat with the other parent. You may think that you're hurting the other parent. And you might, you probably are. You should be nice. I tell people, try to be nice. Let's try to be nice. Let's act like adults. However, who you're really hurting is your kid. Your kid is the person in the middle who's getting caught in the crossfire here. And the damage goes on, like you said, for years. You may have damaged those neurons and how they wire up and for the rest of their life over a period of a year or two where you were being petty or both of you were being petty because of the divorce. Mm-hmm. So, it's really good to know that there's people in our community who share those values and they're a resource to call upon. And if you think that, maybe, looking at this, if the world was perfect and money was perfect and every client had unlimited resources and they would always listen, sometimes people pay us a lot of money and they choose not to listen. I'm sure that happens with therapy too.
Never.
It would be great. It would be great other than the Florida Supreme Court approved parenting course that you do online. If I could send each client and say, talk to Megan about what trauma will do, what it does to the kid long-term, what it will do to your family. And then honestly, I tell people family law is generational.
Yes.
Because if the child is traumatized and is focused on anxiety and survival and those things, and they're not on the higher level learning or they're not emotionally wired up to build relationships, and ultimately you're going to have grandkids. Mm-hmm. Now, how are your grandkids going to fare with a parent who has undergone that trauma? How's that going to affect them? So, it's not I tell people when you have kids and you get divorced, you don't get divorced. You're not done. You're not separated. It's not going to end. There's going to be, high school graduation is, your last probably legal, obligation to be around each other. Kids just turning 18, but they're going to go to college. There'll be college graduation. There's going to be a wedding, probably. There's going to be grandchild's birth, and you're going to have to get along and hopefully can for the sake of your kid and your grandkid at that point. So why create more scar tissue in this family than we have to if everybody will allow it to be peaceful and make a good, smooth transition? Another thing about you that is just absolutely amazing is that you're a guardian ad litem as well, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. Tell me about that and what a guardian ad litem brings to the family law process.
Sure. So that is something that is very near and dear to my heart. Doing this type of work where I feel like my profession has kind of been dedicated to people that are easily forgotten, and kind of slip through the cracks. And as someone who, kind of went through some of that in my own childhood, I think being a guardian ad litem is a gorgeous opportunity to, you are there for the best interest of the child. Your whole job is to do what you can to represent the interests and the needs of the child. And kind of like we've talked about before, parents each get attorneys and they're representing them. And hopefully they are, thoughtful and informed as you are, where we're looking at the family unit here and how we can be respectful and representative of everybody. But especially when we're looking in dependency court, the kids get lost in the shuffle, especially the younger ones, who aren't able to necessarily vocalize what their opinions and their thoughts are. They're going through things, but they can't really say what's going on. So it's an incredible opportunity to help support, but also do kind of a thorough look into, all right, what are these home environments like? Are the parameters that they're experiencing? What is school like? How are they performing? How are they feeling in these? What are the adults that they feel safe around? What are the benefits? What are the pros and the cons of everything when we look at this kind of holistic approach of this child or these children's lives, and kind of help paint a big picture that's not just the bits and pieces from one person's specific view, that can really help bolster, hey, this is what the kid is seeing, this is what they're experiencing, and my best hope is to represent that from as close to their perspective as I can with my bit of knowledge on the side. I think it's a hefty responsibility too, because, you bring your own vision into things too, and what your expectations are. You try really, really hard to represent what the kids, especially the younger ones, right? Like what you think that would be the best version of things based on their interests, desires, and what the expectations are. But you were just kind of talking about, and you sparked this for me. I'm going to take it slightly off path for a second.
Go ahead. That's what this is about.
Like the dynamic I see a lot that makes me think about this too, where, like you said, it could be more traumatic for the kiddos, depending on what the breakdown of the parenting or co-parenting relationship looks like. I see the glue and glitter dynamic a lot, where one parent does the bulk of the boring responsibilities. They're usually the disciplinarian, the ones that get them to the doctor, and then the glitter parent. And there's a lot of resentment that gets built up.
In family law, when I first started practicing, the term was, and I hope I don't get this taken off the air, but Disney dad. It was the Disney dad. I don't know if you've heard that one. The dad who, now, fathers have taken on a much more expansive role. I've been practicing for a while, but that's the kind of the term that was thrown out there, that because it used to be that fathers would get like every other weekend.
Right.
And then on the weekends, they would just, we're going to Disney, we're going here, we're going to the zoo, or, and then, the other parent at that time, the mother, was, brush your teeth, do your homework. And now it's kind of, I have cases where that's totally reversed, and fathers have been bought in to the mix. But there's definite times where in the cases we see hostility and resentment. And then when we're formulating the time sharing, that is a cognitive part of the decision with a lot of people. And then I have some people who are, I'm not going to say they're more controlling, but they're maybe the more involved parent, more serious minded parent. And I've seen them try to say, I'll take every school day and I'll give them every weekend. And I have to, kind of back off of that logic and say, hey, let's think about this just for a minute. You're going to want to take your, children to the circus on the weekend, or you're going to want to have some quality time, and we're going to have to learn to trust this other parent, or how to help this other parent, fill some of those obligations, because it builds resentment, in the long haul. It really does.
Absolutely. And how, like you said, how do you navigate that, where if you don't necessarily trust the other parent to be the glue, but then you get mad at them when they get to be the Disney parent? How do you pull yourself out of that enough to see what is going to be beneficial for the child? And that's a really difficult thing for someone to do. Especially, let's say there's betrayal trauma in there, or, whatever heartache came from the separation or the dissolution of the marriage, that's not going to go away, and you're not automatically going to think of the best interest of your kids, no matter how well-meaning you are. Who could? No one can. And so a lot of that kind of back and forth with the dynamic, well, you know what? I'm the parent that's the absent father, and the hypercritical mom is kind of like our version of the Disney dad, where it's, dad never was really around until he wanted to be.
That's generally what we have too. It's generally different terminology, but that's generally how it expresses itself.
Yeah.
And I have to sometimes remind people that the other parent is an adult, that they have somehow made it through life up until they got married or interacted with you. They have some life experience. They're going to know how to put a Band-Aid on. They're going to know to probably give cough syrup. What I see a lot of, and it's not to make fun of the situation, but it's something that comes up almost every week, is child had a cold and he didn't take the child to the doctor. Or the child had a rash and she didn't, no one's going to parent the same, and it's okay. There's, and honestly, I could be wrong. You're the mental health expert. I think sometimes it's good for the kids to realize, like, dad may parent different than mom parents different than dad. And to maybe, as they go through life, build a toolbox from what they learn from each parent, and have their own unique parenting style ultimately. But I think that comes up a whole lot where especially with the doctor's visits, we hear it every day.
So, yeah, I mean, y'all parented different in the same house anyway. Let's be honest. Like, I am panicked about, every paper cut. And I'm like, we need to make sure we've got Neosporin on it and the right Band-Aids. And my husband's like, they'll be fine. He's a rub some dirt on it kind of guy.
It takes, they're just building a little immunity. It's okay.
So, you're doing it different in your, before things happen. But it's also, like you said, it's a very easy thing of you're not taking care of our child. You don't care about our child as much as I do. But, I'm very curious from your side of things, what I hear a lot on my end is this kind of, where is the line between what is a legal concern versus I just don't think this is a best practice as a parent. And, taking your kid to the doctor and things like that is one that's like, well, I think they should have gone, or they should have been getting medicine, or this is more than a sniffle. I hear that a lot on my side of things. How do you help your clients navigate what the limit is between appropriate parenting and something that is a real concern that needs to be addressed?
It's hard for us because we're not counselors in that sense. However, I sometimes will I'll discuss it with them, and I will try to point out that this may not be of a magnitude that they think it is. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes, as I kind of go through things, I start to pick up on, I'm not sure if it's really a legitimate concern or if it's a manifestation of another hostility coming out because you're angry. And because you're angry, I'm picking on this issue. This is something I can pick at or point out, or I'm just trying to get every little piece of evidence out there, and the evidence really may not have that much weight. The doctor may not care, or the judge is not probably going to be upset that he waited 24 hours or she waited 24 hours to take the child to the walk-in clinic to see if the cold kind of worked, if the cold medicine worked or not. Okay. If that does not work, sometimes I actually will begin cross-examining them and letting them see how this might play out in court. For instance,
okay,
Miss Sanders, on such and such a date, your child had a cold, correct? You didn't immediately call 911. You didn't take them by ambulance to the hospital, did you? You didn't rush them to the urgent care, did you? In fact, you gave them cold medicine. Here in Talking Parents, you told the father that you administered cold medicine. You waited. You waited for 24 hours. The child was just fine. The child recovered. The next day, you told the father that the child was okay, going back to school, correct? But when it's my client's time sharing, you expect them to immediately rush the child to the doctor, correct? And we usually do that, and then hopefully they start to see that this may not play out the way they want it to, and then hopefully also I try to, like you said, point out everybody parents differently. When you were married, you didn't parent the same. There were parenting differences in every household, whether your household is intact or not, and unless it's really egregious or the kid is really being harmed and neglected and kind of, then it's an issue. But to give the parent a little bit of leeway and respect, because you want that same respect on your end during your parenting time. And sometimes they listen, like I said before, sometimes they don't. But, that's the approach I try to take. And then if it's serious, then by all means, like if the child is being neglected, if there are medical needs that are not being met that are serious needs, then, we're going to take those and litigate those to the fullest. Mm-hmm. But, let's pick our battles and pick the ones that are really going to be harmful to the child, as opposed to just, unfortunately, people just kind of picking at each other for no reason. So one of the things I was going to ask you is, there's this terminology about safe and unsafe relationships. And, many of our cases, there's unfortunate circumstances where there may have been a lot of fighting. There may have actually been outright domestic violence that's occurred. And how do you work with children, who've maybe been experienced to unsafe relationships, or teach them going forward to recognize safe versus unsafe relationships coming out of these circumstances?
Yeah, that was a huge bulk of the work when working with kids in foster care. And like you said, kids that are coming out of tumultuous situations, because the only way you learn what's safe versus unsafe is what you are taught in the environments you're in. And I think there's a harsh external criticism of of experiences like that in a home where people ask, well, you should have known that was wrong, or you didn't feel like it was wrong, or why didn't you question things? We don't know to question things we don't know are wrong. If your parents are acting one way, that's the expectation until you are taught something different or you experience something different. In my own personal experience, I didn't know that my home was unhealthy until I got to go to other homes and saw not everybody's parents are like this. Okay, that's good to know. So a lot of it is helping them explore through different situations that they bring up. We do a lot of kind of what I call if-then scenarios of like, oh, okay, so if parents are fighting, then they might do what? And then we'll talk about just kind of lived experience. Well, then they might say some mean things to each other, but then we get over it. Okay, well, does that feel safe or unsafe? Or maybe, well, then they throw things at each other, or then they kick the other parent out and they make them sleep outside. Or we look at the severity and intensity through them sharing different experiences they have, and we work through why that's safe or why it's not safe, and what are safe things for parent roles, safe things for child roles, safe things for peers, safe things for everyone, and exploring the reason behind that too. I think they are so deserving of the information. And then I think another really pivotal part of that is explaining that a parent can be unsafe and still love you, and being safe and loving you are not synonymous, and being unsafe and loving you are not separate. There are plenty of parents who aren't making the safest of choices that love their children and love them dearly. They just aren't capable of making safe choices right now. And so I think that's really, really, really important, especially for trauma-informed approach of kids need to know that their parents love them, but they weren't capable of making the safest choices at that time. So a lot of it is educating about that, and then also helping them understand, okay, well, I wanted to hit somebody like I saw my parent hit somebody, and then I got in trouble at school. That doesn't make any sense. Why would I get in trouble? This is why that's not acceptable. And this is why it wasn't okay when your parent did that. But this might have been why they decided to do that. But this is why we're going to try and do this instead. And just a lot of non-judgmental exploration of where it comes from and how we can change it and how we can express those emotions, but really solidifying that unsafe does not mean unloved. I think that's so important, and it kind of gets glossed over a lot.
Okay, well, this is our last question, but this will not be the last time you're on the show. I guarantee that, as we could talk for days. And, I really enjoyed our time here, going back and forth, and the shared interests and the shared, concerns we have for the kids and these cases, and honestly, the wealth of knowledge you bring to it. But I was going to ask you, because you seem to be an innovator and somebody who likes innovative approaches, if you could bring one innovative approach to the family law court system or to the lawyers in that system, one new tool to put in the toolbox to help these children and to help with situations like this, what would it be?
Well, I'm going to borrow something you already mentioned, but have everybody go through trauma-informed training and really kind of get the foundational work of what happens to people through trauma and the exploration of what causes behaviors that seem outlandish and out of order, but where they come from and why they make sense from a trauma lens, because it really does reframe our thinking in everything. So someone we would see as an at-risk youth, why are they making these choices? It's not a conscious choice. It's an action out of desperation, out of survival mode. And how can we reframe the way we view people if we're going through a trauma lens? It's a lot more empathetic and compassionate. And how can we help them? So trauma-informed training for everyone would be my dream.
My dream would be that. And I think, one other thing, I have a pipe dream that one day my practice will be so successful and so, financially stable that money does not matter.
Yeah, me too.
What I would do is I would love, if I had just unlimited resources, to have someone like you that did mental health, psychology, trauma, that was well-versed, that was just an in-house resource to the clients. Yeah. Let's Megan's part of the team. Nobody can make her testify. Let's bring her in. Let's work through some of this. Let's unpackage some of these issues. Let's get down to the root. Let's try to see if that, we can get past some of this to get you to settlement. Let's see if we get past some of these concerns to get you parenting again. And sometimes, unfortunately, in the middle of the divorce, parenting just stops. They're doing the motions. The kids got a lunch and clothes, but the heart of the parenting, the emotional, the kids are not first anymore because the parent now is in this fight or flight scenario and they're not, some of the nurturing falls off to the side, and their own higher level thought and emotional responses are no longer in tune with the parenting. So, let me ask you, if any of the followers want to get up with you, how do they contact you?
Sure. So my email is megan@thetherapyroomflorida.com, and you are welcome to email me with any questions, concerns, interests that you have. I have no boundaries when it comes to that, and I love to talk to people and help them in any way that I can. You are welcome to search for us on social media. We are at The Therapy Room LLC. We have our own podcast too, where we talk about different mental health components. Our last one was figuring out how to set up boundaries with unhealthy family members. And so it can be just a nice, kind of like this, a nice chat where it's educational, formative, but also it's just kind of comfy and cozy where we talk about similar interests and share what we have. I have one question for you. If you had to think of your favorite musician, favorite band of all time, who would come to mind for you?
Band would be Metallica.
Yeah.
There you go. I must say, that probably says a lot about me, but Metallica. Yes. And I guess individual musician would be the lead singer. And a little fun fact is, in late May, early June, they're going to be in Atlanta, and my wife has bought me tickets to see Metallica. So maybe that says I have anger issues. My mom used to tell me that made me an angry person when I was a teenager. Now they've mellowed out a lot, with their age. Like, they're not the same guys they were. But yeah, I listen to a lot of Metallica. My kids tell me that I'm stuck in the late 80s or 90s, and I'm fine with that. I'm good with that.
It's a good place to be.
Well, all right. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. What's your favorite musician or band?
Yes. So I am a big hip hop head. So Kendrick Lamar has been someone I've cared for a very long time. But like a little fun fact for you, while your kids are giving you judgment, in music therapy, the music that is usually the most meaningful for people is what they listen to in their teenage years through their young adult years, because that's how you kind of figure out who you are. A lot of it's through your musical taste. So yeah, tell them that's when you were figuring out who you were, and that's when you were kind of exploring life. And maybe you were a little bit angry, but you were cool angry, because metal's cool. So you were a cool
to be
guy.
a lawyer, you got to have a little fire, right? So
yeah, for sure.
We are definitely going to have you back on, and we're going to drill down into some of these topics that we touched on today, and we skimmed the surface, but I would love to drill into those and do full episodes on those topics, and to bring people more information on these things so that they make better decisions, and hopefully their kids benefit, their relationships benefit, and they find their way through the court system a little more easy, a little more maybe stress-free, or at least that when they're confronted with these pitfalls, they know how to get around them. So thank you so much, Megan, for taking the time out of your day, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future, okay?
Yes, sir. Thanks so much for having me. This was such a blast. I'm very honored. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.